In London, the house where Queen vocalist Freddie Mercury used to live is for sale. The Kensington home, which was built in 1907, has a bar and a library. When Freddie Mercury died in 1991, the world lost one of rock's most exciting voices. But while millions mourned the Queen frontman they had loved on stage, his closest friends had to deal with something much more personal and shocking. What he left behind in his London residence, Garden Lodge. The mansion was hidden behind thick brick walls in Kensington. It wasn't only where Freddie resided. It was his safe place, his own world. When the doors finally opened after his death, the things found inside shocked even the people who knew him best. From Zanzibar to fame. He was born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946, in Stonetown, Zanzibar, when the island was still under British authority. He didn't become famous as Freddie Mercury until much later. His parents, Bomi and Jair, were from the Parsi community in western India. They came from the city of Bulsar, presently called Valsad in Gujarat. They followed the Zoroastrian religion and took their customs with them when they moved from one continent to another. The Bulsaras had gone to Zanzibar to work. Bomi worked as a cashier at the British Colonial Office, but their family life changed when their sons started acting up and giving them gifts. Freddie had 4 additional incisors when he was born. Most people would have thought this was strange, but to him, it was the secret to his amazing voice range. It seemed like nature had changed his mouth so he could sing. Freddie spent much of his childhood in India, even though Zanzibar was his home. He was already studying to play the piano at the age of 7 while living with family. A year later, he went to St. Peter's, a British-style boarding school not far from Bombay. That's when he initially started to grow. He gathered stamps during the day. One of the few things he owns that is now in the Postal Museum in London is an interest he got from his father. But at night, rock and roll ruled his universe. At age 12, he started a school band called the Hectics. They played covers of songs by Elvis, Cliff Richard, and Little Richard with a boldness that set them apart. People who knew him back then say he had a strange capacity to hear a song on the radio and then play it back on the piano right away. At St. Peter's, Farrokh Bulsara also began to call himself Freddie. The moniker stayed, the music got better, and by 1963 he was back in Zanzibar with his parents. But the island was a powder keg, and the timing couldn't have been worse. The Zanzibar Revolution started in 1964 as a violent revolt against the Sultan's Arab-led regime. The Bulsaras had to run away because thousands of Arabs and Indians were killed. Their escape took them to Feltham, Middlesex, England, which is far from the sunny beaches where Freddie grew up. They first lived on Hamilton Close, then moved to Hamilton Road for a short while, and then settled into a small house on Gladstone Avenue. England was the real turning point. Freddie started his art education at Isleworth Polytechnic and then went on to Ealing Art College, where he got a certificate in graphic design in 1969. He would subsequently use the same design skills to draw the famous Queen crest. But in the early days, getting by meant doing odd jobs and hustling. He worked as a luggage handler at Heathrow Airport, carrying bags and dreams that were more heavier than anything in those bags. He sold antique scarves and used Edwardian clothes with a new acquaintance, drummer Roger Taylor. Taylor didn't think Freddie was the singer the world would one day know. He was just my eccentric friend. The guy who always knew where the action was. People remembered Freddie as shy and quiet, someone who liked music more than talking. The showy behavior that was starting to show through was only a front. But when he got on stage, it was like night and day. He was the lead singer of Ibex, a Liverpool band who played a lot of Hendrix-inspired blues. The band later changed its name to Wreckage. He even resided above a bar on Penny Lane for a while, getting a taste of Liverpool's music scene from the inside. After Wreckage fell apart, he tried again with a different group called Sour Milk Sea. But by the beginning of 1970, that was gone too. To someone else, this would have looked like a series of failures. Freddie thought it was a rehearsal. Every step, every band, and every time he was turned down made him better prepared for the stage where he would ultimately belong. The rise of a rock star. Freddie Mercury was no longer just a bashful art student selling scarves at Kensington Market by 1970. That March, he teamed up with drummer Roger Taylor and guitarist Brian May to become the lead singer of their band, Smile. A year later, bassist John Deacon joined the group, and the band that would soon take over the world was born. Freddie, on the other hand, wasn't going to settle for a normal name. He campaigned for Queen even if others were unsure. He thought the word was strong, dominating, and indeed, meant to make people angry. He once said that it sounded royal, beautiful, forceful, and universal. And even though he knew all about the campy meanings, it was only half of what drew him in. At this point, he formally changed his name from Bulsara to Mercury, which fit his larger-than-life destiny. He was already establishing the band's identity before the music took off. Freddie made the Queen crest, a fantasy coat of arms that combined the band's astrological indications, just before their first album came out. For Deacon and Taylor, he got lions, for May, he got a crab, and for himself, the Virgo, he got two fairies. A crown shone in the middle of the huge line, which was all rising beneath the wings of a fiery phoenix. It looked almost like a royal crown, which was a great metaphor for a band that would rule stages like rock kings. Freddie's voice when he spoke was in the baritone range. But his voice went into soaring tenor territory, which gave Queen a vocal edge that few other bands could match. He was always on the move when it came to writing songs, and he was hard to pin down. Queen's biggest singles, such Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love, Don't Stop Me Now, and many more, have his fingerprints all over them. Freddie despised doing the same thing over and over again, so each one sounded like it came from a different world. He said that he did well with change, taking ideas from things he saw in music, movies, or plays that he liked. Some of his works, like Bohemian Rhapsody or the grandiose tracks from Queen 2, had keys that changed all the time and structures that were all over the place. Some, like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, were cut down to just a few chords. The balance is what made it special. Freddie could be complicated and fun, serious and light, but he always drew people in. He often said that he could hardly read music, but he wrote everything by instinct, sitting at the piano and letting the thoughts flow. Of course, the records weren't the only thing that made him who he was. It was the stage. Freddie Mercury loved to perform live. He had a theatricality that was equal parts tease, shock, and pure charm, whether it was a theater or a stadium. People who observed him understood they were seeing something special. David Bowie once said that Freddie didn't just join the ranks of theatrical rock stars, he went above and beyond. Brian May claimed that Freddie had a way of reaching even the last individual in the rear of the furthest stand, drawing everyone in the audience into his orbit. The height of such power was on July 13, 1985, at Live Aid. Queen seized the show at Wembley Stadium in only 20 minutes. Freddie wore pants and a white tank top, and 72,000 people clapped along with him. His long a cappella note became renowned as the note heard round the world. Years later, critics would say it was the best live rock show ever. It was more than just a concert for those who were there. It was a time when I went beyond myself. In August 1986, he played his last show with Queen in Neboith Park. Freddie ended with God Save the Queen, and around 200,000 fans saw it. Wearing a royal robe and carrying a golden crown high above his head. He had softly warned Brian May a week previously that he probably wouldn't be doing this for much longer. The curtain was about to come down, but not before he made a name for himself as a one-of-a-kind showman. He was on fire on stage. He was still a jumble of contradictions when he wasn't on stage. A piano virtuoso who eventually stopped playing because he wanted to be able to walk around on stage. A songwriter who could create complicated operatic harmonies one day and play a rockabilly song with 3 chords the next. He also played guitar on songs like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, showing that there were no limits with Freddie Mercury, only new ways to do things. Freddie's private life, his strange personality, and his love life were just as unexpected as his music. People knew that Freddie Mercury had encounters with men, but they didn't know that he also had a string of relationships with women, including actresses, models, and even famous people. Even though he was one of the most famous rock stars of all time, he was able to keep a lot of his private life secret. People who knew him often said the same thing. Freddie had a lot of different sides. He was a peacock in sequins and leather on stage, and he ruled arenas like a god. He could be quiet, hard to find, and even a little guarded when he wasn't on stage. But when night fell, he acted like time was chasing him. He lived quickly, loudly, and without fear. Queen held parties that were so crazy at their heyday that they became legends. The most renowned of these was the jazz album Bash at the Fairmont Hotel in New Orleans in 1978. Think about it. There were naked waiters carrying trays, wrestlers in a jacuzzi with no clothes on, and dwarfs walking around with silver trays of cocaine on their heads. One performer even chewed the heads off of live chickens. That night, rock and roll excess had a face with a mustache. It was a world very different from Freddie's rigorous childhood in India and the calm existence he started living in London when he was just 8. But once he became famous, he never used moderation again. He wouldn't slow down even when HIV started to affect his life. Months after he was diagnosed, he made his 41st birthday one of the craziest evenings in Ibiza. 700 people, 350 bottles of champagne, and fireworks that were huge. They lighted up the skies all the way to Majorca. The bill included the cost of 232 broken glasses by morning. By the middle of the 1980s, Freddie was so famous that even royalty wanted to be with him. People in close circles knew that he was pals with Princess Diana. He put her in a jacket, hat, and sunglasses one night and took her to London's Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a gay pub where she finally got away from everyone. If only for a little while. He also liked other famous people, like Michael Jackson. In 1983, they tried to record together, but everything went wrong. Freddie called and said he couldn't stay working in the studio with a llama. But Jackson once stopped a session when he saw Freddie inhaling cocaine through a $100 bill. Their chemistry died out, leaving just stories. People all across the world talked about it all the time, but Freddie hardly ever did. Not even his parents knew. Some thought he had already told the truth in Bohemian Rhapsody, disguising his problems in the song's enigmatic lyrics. But women were still a big part of his life in private. Mary Austin was the love of his life when he was young. In 1969, he met her while she was working at the trendy fashion store Biba. Freddie was 24, broke, and selling clothes at a market booth with Roger Taylor, the drummer. Mary was 19 years old. Stable, grounded, and working class. They fell in love instantly and moved into a modest apartment. For years, Mary paid the bills while Freddie chased a dream that no one else could see. Freddie asked her to marry him when he became famous. Mary recalls being too startled to really know what was going on, but the engagement fell apart when he told her he was attracted to guys. Mary remembered telling him in no uncertain terms that he wasn't AF asterisk 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 INGF 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 asterisk 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 INGF. Asterisk 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 INGF asterisk 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 INGF asterisk 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 INGF asterisk 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 ING. She stayed close, worked for his management, went with him on tours, and stood by him until he died. Freddie called Jane his common-law wife and gave her half of his fortune and the garden lodge at his Kensington mansion. She took care of his ashes, and she still keeps that secret. Then came Barbara Valentine, the flashy Austrian actress who brought her own fire to the stage to match Freddie's. He also became profoundly in love with Winfried Winnie Kirkberg while he lived in Munich, a German restaurant owner who gave him a wedding ring that he wore with pride. But it was Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser, who became his real partner in life. Freddie named him his husband, wore the gold ring Jim gave him till the day he died, and built a house with him in Ireland. Jim was with him for the past 7 years, through sickness and deterioration, to the very end. Freddie's other hobbies burned just as brightly as his love. He treated his kitties as they were his kids. He would call home while on tour merely to have someone hold the phone up to their hairy ears. Delilah, his favorite, even had a song written about her. His Kensington home was full with Japanese art and antiques, which he gathered with the same enthusiasm he put into music. That passion often led to heated arguments in the studio. He once made a joke that Queen fought about the air they breathe. But that tension was what made great works of art that still shock stadiums today. AIDS took away his physical power, but not his soul. Freddie didn't tell the public about his sickness until the day before he died in 1991. He died the next day at the age of 45, shocking the globe. There was no way to sum him up. Too large, too different, too real. But maybe Brian May, his bandmate, did it best. Freddie Mercury was a vocalist and a lover of life. Freddie's life was full of paradoxes. One moment he was soft and loving, and the next he was angry and explosive. He loved his animals, his paintings, and his music, but not every relationship in his life was based on love. Some came with strings attached, and one in particular would create scars that would last longer than most. The Paul Prenter betrayal, loyalty for sale. By the middle of the 1970s, Freddie Mercury was already well on his way to being one of rock's most interesting people. But behind the scenes, a guy named Paul Prenter discreetly entered his life and would go on to change, complicate, and ultimately betray Freddie in ways that people still argue about today. People think that Mercury and Prenter initially met at a pub in 1975. 2 years later, Prenter was made his formal manager. And shortly, others started to talk about how the two were more than simply co-workers. Some said they were lovers, although Prenter's brothers would later say that this was just a rumor. Things seemed fine for a while. People considered that the first 5 years of their partnership were stable, if not good. But by 1982, things started to go apart. Queen's album Hot Space had full of funk and disco influences, which was a big change from their typical rock songs. Freddie was getting into the experimental sound, but Brian May and Roger Taylor hated it and blamed Prenter for driving Mercury in that route. The album didn't do well, tensions rose, and Prenter's relationship with the rest of the band almost fell apart. Freddie still kept him around, though. Prenter stayed with Mercury for a few more years, even though things between him and the band got worse. But loyalty can only go so far, and when their relationship ended, the devastation was huge. In Prenter, he sold The Sun a damaging story. He publicly revealed Mercury in it. Made his relationship with Jim Hutton public. Those who were closest to Freddie were startled by the treachery. Ray, Paul's brother, says that Paul was angry because he felt that he was being ignored at a time when he was also dealing with HIV/AIDS. Ray said that Paul had worked for Mercury for a long time and felt like he had been left behind with nothing to show for it. His statements made it seem like he was a man who had been let down, injured and in need. Showed that Paul had gone to the tabloids because he needed money for his therapy and thought he had no other choice. For Freddie Mercury fans, that betrayal was one of the worst things that happened in the singer's life. It left a mark on Prenter's legacy. That chapter with Prenter left scars on Freddie's public image and on the delicate confidence he had in the people around him. After that kind of betrayal, he became more protective of his friends, more private, and more determined to keep his secrets safe. That's why, as his health began to fail, only a few people would ever know the whole story of what he was going through. The last call for the curtain. Freddie Mercury lived in a way that no one else did. Loud, flashy, and completely original. He was the exact epitome of showmanship when he was on stage. Wearing clothes that sparkled and singing so loudly that it shook the heavens. But Freddie developed a separate universe that was jealously protected behind all that color and fire. Not many people were allowed within those towering gates, and even fewer knew what was actually going on with him in the last few years of his life. The world had lost one of its best voices by November 24, 1991. It wasn't simply that Freddie Mercury had died that shocked so many people, it was how little anyone outside of his small circle knew. The last time fans saw him on stage with his Queen bandmates was at the Brit Awards in 1990. After that, Freddie started to pull away and disappear into the shadows of Garden Lodge, his Kensington safe haven. He only spent time with people he trusted the most inside, his assistant Peter Freestone, his partner Jim Hutton, and his lifelong friend Mary Austin. The other members of Queen knew what was going on. They could tell that their bandmate was sick, but Freddie never wanted to talk about it. For years, there had been rumors going around. The Sun and other tabloids said he had been tested for HIV as early as 1986. Nothing was ever proven, though, and Freddie kept the story going to the very end, as he always does. The world didn't hear it from him until November 23, 1991, only one day before he died. Roxy Meads, Freddie's publicist, put out a statement that Freddie wrote when he was dying. He said that he had HIV and was dealing with AIDS. Freddie said he had chosen to keep this a secret to preserve the privacy of the people closest to him. But now his fans needed to know the truth. He asked everyone to join him, his physicians, and the rest of the globe in the fight against the disease. Freddie Mercury was dead 24 hours later. He was only 45 years old. Not only did his comments matter because of who he was, but also because of when he chose to say them. AIDS was a scary shadow in the early 1990s. There was no treatment, and anyone who was linked to it was looked down upon. Freddie's public proclamation of his reality in the face of that dread wasn't only stunning, it was also defiant. Later, surviving members of Queen said they knew Freddie was sick but never brought it up with him. Brian May remembered that they never really talked about what was wrong, as if they had made a deal not to. Freddie said he couldn't go on tour. That was all he was ready to say. As time went on, it became evident what was really going on, but no one stated it out loud. Freddie didn't tell his close friends about it until a meal in Montreux in 1989. The confirmation stung hard, even if they had previously guessed. Brian thought about how Freddie was worried that his life would become a circus if the truth came out. He didn't want pity or to be shown off as a victim. He wanted to keep making music, as he expressed it, until the very end. Jim Hutton was there for him through it all. They met in a nightclub in 1985. And what started as a spark grew into a strong love that lasted until Freddie died. The couple lived a secluded existence at Garden Lodge, away from the public eye. They even wore wedding rings to indicate how committed they were. Later, Jim said that their relationship was just theirs and theirs wasn't for the world to pick apart. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991, at Garden Lodge. His body gave way to bronchial pneumonia caused by AIDS problems. Jim Hutton died in 2010 after a long battle with lung cancer. He was 60 years old. Freddie may have lived his life in front of the public all the time, but he decided to die when he wanted to. And in those last days, he showed once more that he knew how to take the ultimate bow, even when there were no sequins, lights, or loud audiences. His closest pals were stunned by what they found in Freddie Mercury's London house. People all across the world grieved Freddie Mercury when he died in 1991 in his cherished Garden Lodge. But what he left behind in Kensington's high walls was something else entirely. A home that felt more like an extension of his soul than a place to live. For 30 years, it sat there, untouched, a time capsule of Freddie's strange ideas, good taste, and talent. And when people eventually saw what was inside, it shocked them just as much as the man himself did. Freddie bought the house in 1980, when Queen was at the height of its glory. He paid £500,000 for what would become his sanctuary at 1 Logan Place, a Georgian-style house that rapidly became known as Garden Lodge among friends. It wasn't merely a place to live. Freddie established a sanctuary behind the now famous green door that was a reflection of all his contradictions. Victorian style meets Japanese serenity in a way that is both ornate and cozy, loud and peaceful. Mary Austin, Freddie's ex-fiancée and best friend, remembered the first time they walked through that green door. She thought the house was a true artist's residence and instantly felt at peace there. Freddie's flamboyance, on the other hand, was everywhere. He would lace up his white trainers, fix his mustache, and turn into the unstoppable force that took over stages all over the world in his mirrored dressing room. The walls were a vibrant, warm saffron yellow that Freddie loved as soon as you stepped through the door. It wasn't by chance. It shone with the same brilliance he had on stage. His piano, the one that made Bohemian Rhapsody, was in the drawing room on the second story, which was very high. His bedroom was upstairs, behind that mirrored dressing room. That's where the showman finally got some sleep. Mary kept the house just the way Freddie had left it for years, as if he would come back in at any minute, sit down at his piano, and start writing music again. The gardens were equally as amazing. Freddie personally oversaw their making and designed them in a Japanese manner. The flowers on the magnolia trees were gentle pinks. There were water features in the background, and the manicured topiary made the whole place feel tranquil and otherworldly. Freddie had made his own Eden in Kensington, a region where outdoor space is virtually legendary. The pub where he hung out with his best pals and the music area both had views of the garden. You can almost see him there. He stood there with a glass in one hand and a robe around his shoulders, looking out at the flowers while words and melodies came to him. But Garden Lodge wasn't just a home. It turned into a safe for Freddie's valuables. When Mary finally decided to sell the house, she initially auctioned more than 1,500 of his things through Sotheby's and sent the money to AIDS charity. One of the things was the famous fake crown of St. Edward and the velvet robe he wore on the Queen's Magic Tour in 1986. With a grin, Freddie slipped into both of them, which was a tongue-in-cheek reference to his status as the self-crowned king of rock. Those pictures, with his arms spread wide and his crown shining in the stage lights, are still some of the most famous of his career. Fans got to see even more. Handwritten lyrics to songs that characterized a time, flashy stage outfits, and the things that had been at Garden Lodge for decades. The green garden door itself was probably the most surprising thing. Covered with years of fan letters, love notes, thank you messages, and confessions from those who thought they knew him. It sold for an incredible £412,750 at auction, which is almost the same amount Freddie spent for the whole house in 1980. The mansion was finally put up for sale in 2024, and its worth had risen to more than £30 million. Mary said that living in the house had been a lot of fun. Full of memories of music, laughter, and quiet peace. She wanted the next person to walk through the green door to feel what she and Freddie had felt, that it wasn't simply a house, but a place where love and creativity could grow. Garden Lodge wasn't meant to gently disappear into the past. It was built, arranged, and lived in with the same passion that distinguished Freddie Mercury. It was brave, soft, and timeless, much like his music. It will keep bringing people in for years to come, just like the man. A reminder that Freddie's magic was never simply on stage. It was in every place he touched. Did you ever like Queen? Please tell us in the comments below. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You should also click on the next video that shows up on your screen. You will like it.